Liralay's knees buckled as the world tilted sideways, her vision blurring into streaks of gray and gold. The cobblestones rushed up to meet her face, but instead of cold stone, strong arms caught her mid-fall, lifting her against a chest that smelled of leather and mountain air. "Easy there," a deep voice rumbled above her head. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped her cracked lips. The last thing she remembered was counting the coins in her empty purse, 3 copper pieces. That wouldn't buy bread for a sparrow. 7 days without a proper meal had finally claimed its victory. The stranger's horse snorted impatiently as he adjusted her weight in his arms. Through half-closed eyes, Liralay caught glimpses of his face-sharp cheekbones shadowed by an old scar, eyes the color of storm clouds, and black hair that fell across his forehead like ink spilled on parchment. "Who are you?" she managed to breathe. "Kale Night Wind," he said, swinging effortlessly into his saddle while still holding her. "And you're coming with me." Before she could protest, his stallion launched into a gallop that carried them away from the marketplace where she'd been scrounging for scraps. The city blurred past them, merchants shouting, children playing, the comfortable chaos of a world that had forgotten her existence. Liralay had been invisible for months, another faceless refugee from the border wars that had swallowed her village whole. She'd survived by picking pockets and sleeping in doorways, but pride had kept her from begging. Now, wrapped in this stranger's cloak with his arm locked protectively around her waist, she felt more vulnerable than she had since fleeing her burning home. "Where are you taking me?" she asked as they left the city gates behind. "Somewhere safe." His voice carried an odd tension, as if he were arguing with himself. "Somewhere you can eat without counting coins." The countryside opened before them like a green ocean, hills rolling endlessly toward mountains that scraped the belly of the sky. Kale's horse ate up the miles with mechanical precision, never seeming to tire despite carrying 2 riders. As her strength slowly returned, Liralay became aware of details she'd missed in her delirium. The horse's hooves made no sound on the hard-packed earth. Kale's skin held a subtle luminescence, like moonlight caught beneath marble. And when she glanced down at his hands holding the reins, she saw fingertips that ended in points too sharp to be entirely human. "You're not from around here," she said carefully. His laugh held no humor. "Neither are you, judging by that accent." "Border folk, aren't you?" She nodded, surprised he'd recognized the lilting cadence that marked her as one of the mountain people. Most lowlanders couldn't tell the difference between border speech and common tongue. "Then we're both strangers in strange lands," Kale said, his grip on her tightening slightly as they took a sharp turn around a cliff face. "The question is whether that makes us allies or enemies." Liralay felt her heart skip as she realized she was completely at this mysterious rider's mercy, racing toward an unknown destination with someone or something that might not be human at all. The castle materialized from shadow and starlight, its towers twisted into impossible spirals that seemed to defy the very notion of gravity. Liralay blinked hard, certain hunger had finally driven her mad, but the structure remained stubbornly real as they approached its silver gates. "Welcome to Valdris Sanctuary," Kale said, dismounting with fluid grace before helping her down. "Built in the space between worlds where the desperate find refuge." Her legs nearly gave out again, but this time from awe rather than weakness. The castle walls shimmered like heat waves, occasionally revealing glimpses of other landscapes. A desert under twin moons, a forest where the trees grew downward from the sky, an ocean of liquid crystal. "This is impossible," she whispered. "So is starving to death in a world of plenty, yet here we are." Kale's hand found the small of her back, steadying her as they walked toward the entrance. Reality is more flexible than most people believe. Inside, the sanctuary defied every architectural law Liralay had ever known. Staircases led up and down simultaneously, Doorways opened onto rooms that were somehow larger than the spaces they occupied, and windows showed views of places that couldn't possibly coexist. But it was the dining hall that made her weep. Tables groaned under the weight of feast enough to feed armies roasted meats that glistened with herbs she couldn't name, fruits that sparkled like jewels, bread that steamed with warmth and smelled like every childhood memory of safety she'd ever cherished. "Eat," Cale commanded gently, guiding her to a chair. "As much as you want, whenever you want. That's the first rule here." Lorelei fell upon the food with shameless hunger, tears streaming down her face as flavors exploded across her starved palate. She ate until her stomach ached with fullness, until the hollow desperation that had gnawed at her for months finally retreated. Only then did she notice they weren't alone. Other figures moved through the hall, a woman with bark for skin tending flowering vines that served as chandeliers, a man whose shadow moved independently of his body clearing plates that refilled themselves, children with eyes like kaleidoscopes, playing games that involved manipulating probability itself. "Who are they?" she asked. "Refugees," Cale said simply. "Like you, like me, once upon a time. This sanctuary exists for those who've been displaced by forces beyond their control." "And you run this place?" Something flickered across his features, pain, maybe, or regret. "I'm bound to it. Guardian and prisoner both." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone that might have been marble or might have been solidified moonlight. "You should rest. Tomorrow, if you choose to stay, you'll begin to understand what this place really is." A woman appeared at Lorelei's elbow, tall, elegant, with silver hair that moved like liquid mercury and skin that held the faint blue tinge of winter ice. "I'm the Sarian Frostweave," she said in a voice like wind chimes. "I'll show you to your quarters." As they walked through corridors that rearranged themselves with each step, the Sarian spoke in measured tones. "Cale doesn't usually bring strays home personally. In 300 years, I've seen him venture beyond these walls perhaps a dozen times." 300 years? Lorelei stopped walking. "Time moves differently here. He's been guardian of this place since before your great-grandparents were born." The Sarian's ice-blue eyes studied her with uncomfortable intensity. "The question is why you, child of the burning borders? What makes you worth breaking his self-imposed exile?" They stopped before a door carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Your room," the Sarian said. "But be warned, nothing in this sanctuary comes without cost. Cale saved your life today, but that debt will demand payment eventually. The only question is what form that payment will take." Lorelei awoke to sunlight streaming through windows that showed 7 different skies. Her room existed in a state of controlled impossibility, furniture that floated without support, walls covered in tapestries that depicted scenes from her own memories, and a mirror that reflected not her appearance but her emotional state in swirls of color and light. A soft knock interrupted her exploration. "Come in," she called, expecting the Sarian or another of the sanctuary's ethereal residents. Instead, Cale entered carrying a tray laden with breakfast and wearing an expression she couldn't read. In daylight, his otherworldly nature was more pronounced: skin that held inner luminescence, eyes that shifted color like storm clouds, and that unsettling grace that marked him as something beyond mortal. "How did you sleep?" he asked, setting the tray on a table that materialized to catch it. "Like the dead or the well-fed?" She touched her stomach, still amazed by the sensation of satiation. "Thank you for everything." His smile held shadows. "Don't thank me yet. You don't understand what you've accepted by coming here." "Then explain it to me." Cale moved to the window, staring out at a landscape that couldn't possibly exist. "This sanctuary stands at the crossroads of dimensions, sustained by the binding of its guardian. That guardian, me, cannot leave for more than a few hours without the entire structure beginning to collapse. But you left to find me. Yes. The word came out like a confession. For the first time in 3 centuries, I risked everything to venture into your world. Do you know why? Lirelei shook her head, though something in her chest began to flutter like caged birds. He turned to face her, and she saw raw vulnerability in his storm-colored eyes. Because I dreamed of you. For months, visions of a woman starving in foreign streets haunted my sleep. Her face, her voice, the exact moment she would fall, all of it played out in perfect detail until I couldn't ignore the calling anymore. That's impossible. So is this entire place, yet here we stand. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. The binding that keeps me here is weakening, Lirelei. After 300 years of solitary guardianship, the magic that sustains this sanctuary is beginning to fail. It needs renewal. Understanding dawned like cold water down her spine. And that renewal requires a willing bond between 2 souls, a partnership strong enough to anchor the sanctuary between worlds. His hand reached toward her face but stopped inches short, trembling slightly. I didn't save you out of kindness. I saved you because the magic itself called to me, showed me that you were the key to preserving everything I've built here. She stepped back, anger and hurt warring in her chest. So this was all manipulation? The rescue, the food, the shelter, just elaborate bait to trap me here? No, the word exploded from him with desperate intensity. It began as necessity. Yes, but the moment I touched you, the moment I looked into your eyes, he ran hands through his dark hair. What I feel for you has nothing to do with magical bindings or sanctuary preservation. It has everything to do with the way you smiled even while starving, the way you maintained dignity even in desperation. You don't know me. I know you chose pride over begging. I know you helped a child find her lost kitten even when you could barely stand. I know you sing border ballads when you think no one is listening and that you dream of rebuilding your village someday. His voice dropped to a whisper. The magic showed me who you are, Lirelei of the burning borders. It showed me the woman I could love. The word hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. And if I refuse? She asked quietly. Then I'll find another way to renew the binding, or I'll let the sanctuary fall and everyone here will be scattered back to their original fates, including you back to the streets where I found you. The choice hung before her, freedom with poverty and uncertainty, or captivity with safety and something that might be love. 3 days passed in a haze of impossible wonders and growing confusion. Lirelei explored the sanctuary's ever-shifting architecture, met refugees from a dozen different worlds, and learned that reality was far more malleable than she'd ever imagined. But through it all, Cale kept his distance, appearing only at meals, to watch her with those storm cloud eyes before disappearing again into the sanctuary's labyrinth and depthstot. It was the Sarian who finally explained his absence. He's preparing the binding ritual, the winter-touched woman said as they walked through a garden where roses bloomed in mathematical spirals and butterflies traced equations in the air. Such magic requires perfect conditions, precise timing, and absolute certainty from both participants. What happens during the ritual? Your souls would be intertwined with the sanctuary itself, making you co-guardians of this place. You would share his immortality, his power, and his responsibility, but also his imprisonment. The Sarian's ice-blue gaze turned sharp. Tell me, child, do you love him? The question hit like a physical blow. I don't know. How can I love someone I've known for 3 days? Time moves differently when souls recognize each other. I've seen couples love instantly and others take centuries to understand their feelings. The Sarian paused beside a fountain that flowed upward. But love alone isn't enough for a binding of this magnitude. There must be trust, partnership, shared purpose. And if there isn't, Then the ritual will fail, the sanctuary will collapse, and both of you will likely die in the process." That night, unable to sleep with such knowledge weighing on her mind, Lorelei wandered the sanctuary's halls until she found herself at the entrance to what the Sarian had called the Heart Chamber, the room where Kale maintained the magical bonds that held everything together. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of impossible light within. She pushed it open and gasped. The chamber was a sphere of crystalline walls that reflected not images but pure emotion swirls of color that represented every feeling that had ever been experienced within the sanctuary's bounds. At the center, Kale knelt on a platform suspended in empty space, his hands pressed against a pulsing orb of energy that bathed him in silver radiance. But it was his expression that made her heart clench, pain etched in every line of his face, exhaustion that spoke of centuries spent holding the world together through sheer will. "How long have you been watching?" he asked without opening his eyes. "Not long." She stepped into the chamber, surprised when the crystal floor supported her weight. "The Sarian told me about the binding ritual. And what did you decide?" The question hung between them like a sword. Lorelei moved closer, studying the man who held the fate of hundreds of refugees in his hands. "I decided that I need to understand something first, which is why you really saved me." She reached the platform's edge. "Not the magical calling, not the need for a binding partner. Why you personally chose to risk everything for a starving stranger." His eyes opened then, meeting hers with devastating honesty. "Because in 300 years of watching people come and go, you were the first person who made me remember what it felt like to be human." "I don't understand." He stood slowly, the energy orb pulsing brighter as his hands left its surface. "When I first became guardian of this place, I was dying poisoned by enemies who wanted to claim my family's lands. The previous guardian offered me immortality in exchange for taking on his burden. I accepted because the alternative was death. You've regretted it ever since. Every day. Until I saw you falling in that marketplace and realized that for the first time in 3 centuries, someone else's well-being mattered more to me than my own suffering." He stepped toward her. "That's when I knew I was still capable of love." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. "The ritual," Lorelei said carefully. "What exactly does it require?" "Complete honesty, absolute trust, and a willingness to share not just power, but every thought, every memory, every secret either of us has ever held." His voice dropped. "There would be no privacy, no hidden corners of the soul. We would know each other completely. And that terrifies you." "It terrifies me," he admitted. "Because what if you see everything I am and decide you can't love it?" The binding ritual was set for the night of the convergence, when all dimensions aligned and the sanctuary's need for renewed energy would be at its peak. Lorelei had one day to make her final decision, and she spent it in the sanctuary's vast library, reading everything she could find about soul-binding magic and its consequences. What she discovered changed everything. "You lied to me," she said, cornering Kale in his private chambers that evening. The room was spartanly furnished, containing only the bare necessities and a single window that looked out onto her destroyed village of view she now realized had been created specifically for her benefit. He looked up from the ancient tome he'd been studying, resignation already shadowing his features. "What did you learn? That the binding ritual you described? It's not the only option." She slammed the book she'd been reading onto his desk. "There's another way to renew the sanctuary's power, one that doesn't require a permanent soul bond." Kale's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker behind his eyes. "And what way is that?" "A temporary joining. 12 hours of shared energy that would renew the sanctuary's power for another 300 years. The magic would be just as strong, but afterward we'd both be free to choose whether to stay or go. Yes, he said simply. That option exists. Then, why didn't you tell me about it? He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the illusion of her burned village. Because I'm a selfish bastard who's been alone for 3 centuries, and can't bear the thought of watching you walk away. The raw honesty in his voice hit her like a physical blow. So you decided to trick me into permanent bondage instead? I told you the terms of the permanent binding. I told you there were risks. I told you that you were free to refuse. He turned to face her, and she saw 300 years of loneliness in his storm-gray eyes. What I didn't tell you is that there might be alternatives. And for that deception, you have every right to hate me. I don't hate you. The words came out softer than she'd intended. But I can't trust someone who withholds crucial information to manipulate my choices. I know. Do you? She moved closer, studying his face. Because I think you believe that if you just suffer prettily enough, I'll forgive you and choose to. Stay out of pity? His jaw tightened. That's not, isn't it? Poor, immortal guardian, trapped and alone. Finally find someone who might love him but has to trick her into staying because he's too scared to trust that he might be worth choosing freely. She crossed her arms. It's a compelling story, Cale. But it's also insulting. How is it insulting? Because it assumes I'm too weak or stupid to make an informed choice. Because it treats me like a prize to be won rather than a person with agency. Her voice rose with each word. Because it means you don't actually trust me to love you for who you are instead of what you can provide. The accusation hung between them like a blade. You're right, he said finally. I've been alone so long that I forgot how to trust anyone with the truth. I forgot that real love requires honesty, even when that honesty might destroy everything you want. So tell me the truth now, all of it. Cale was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was steady but raw. The truth is that I've been watching you for months through scrying pools, not just dreaming about you. I became obsessed with your daily struggles, your small acts of kindness, the way you sang to keep your spirits up. I fell in love with you. Long before we met, Lirelei felt her breath catch. The truth is that while the sanctuary does need renewed power, it could survive for several more years before becoming critical. I use the urgency as an excuse to act on my obsession. And the temporary binding option would work perfectly and leave you completely free. But there's a catch I haven't mentioned. His eyes met hers. The person who performs it with me would retain a permanent telepathic link to this place. You could leave, but you'd always know. If the sanctuary was in danger, always feel the pain of every refugee who sought shelter here. Understanding dawned. You'd still have a hold on me. Unintentionally, but yes. The knowledge of suffering you could prevent would likely draw you back here eventually, whether you wanted to come or not. He ran a hand through his dark hair. There's no option that leaves us both completely free, Lirelei. Magic always demands balance. She stared at him, processing the full scope of their situation. Then the real choice isn't between freedom and captivity. It's between different types of connection. Yes, and I should have trusted you with that choice from the beginning instead of trying to manipulate the outcome. Yes, she agreed, you should have. The night of convergence arrived with phenomena that defied natural law. Aurora danced. Through walls, gravity became optional in certain rooms, and the sanctuary's very stones hummed with anticipation. Lirelei stood before her mirror, watching emotion swirl across its surface in patterns of gold and deep blue, trying to understand what her own heart was telling her. A soft knock interrupted her contemplation. Come in, she called out to her surprise. It wasn't Cale who entered, but a young man she'd never seen before, tall and lean, with sun-golden hair and eyes the color of summer grass. He moved with predatory grace, and something about his presence made the air itself seem to recoil. Who are you? She asked, instinctively stepping back. Veldrick Thornmere, he said with a smile that was all sharp edges. And I'm here to offer you a third option that your noble guardian forgot to mention. Before she could respond, the door slammed shut behind him with a sound like thunder. The symbols carved into the wood flared with warning light, but Veldrick's presence seemed to mock their protective magic. What are you? She breathed. Someone with a vested interest in seeing this sanctuary fall. His form flickered, revealing glimpses of something ancient and terrible beneath a human facade. The binding magic that sustains this place draws its power from dimensional rifts that I've been trying to access for centuries. If the sanctuary collapses, those rifts become available for other purposes. Kale is currently unconscious in the heart chamber, courtesy of a little surprise I left for him. Nothing permanent, mind you, I need him alive for the binding ritual to fail spectacularly. Veldrick circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. Which brings me to my proposition. I'm not interested in anything you're offering. Even if it's complete freedom? No soul bonds, no telepathic links, no magical obligations whatsoever? He paused directly in front of her. I can transport you anywhere in the multiverse you wish to go, give you enough gold to rebuild your village 10 times over, and ensure that you never have to think about this place or its guardian again. The offer was everything she'd thought she wanted, but something about it felt poisonous. What's the catch? You simply walk away, tonight, before the convergence reaches its peak and Kale wakes up. His smile widened. Without you here to complete either binding ritual, the sanctuary's defenses will crumble within hours. Everyone here will be scattered back to their original fates, and the dimensional rifts will be mine to claim. You're talking about condemning hundreds of people to death or worse. I'm talking about freeing you from a choice between two different prisons. Veldrick's eyes glowed with inhuman light. Did you really think a man who's been alone for 3 centuries could love you for anything other than what you represent to him? You're not a person to Kale. You're a solution to his loneliness, a key to renewing his power. Nothing more. The words hit like physical blows, echoing doubts she'd been trying to suppress for days. That's not true, isn't it? Has he asked about your dreams for the future? Your hopes beyond this sanctuary? Has he wondered what you might want to do with your life if you weren't trapped here playing Eternal Guardian? Veldrick leaned closer. Or has every conversation been about his needs, his loneliness, his magical requirements? Lirelei opened her mouth to argue but found she couldn't. Because if she was honest, nearly every interaction with Kale had been centered around the sanctuary and its needs. He cares for me, she said weakly. He cares for what you can do for him. There's a difference, Veldrick extended his hand. I'm offering you the chance to find out what it means to be valued for yourself, rather than your magical compatibility. The offer hung between them like temptation incarnate. Complete freedom, unlimited possibilities, escape from an impossible choice between different forms of captivity. Everything she'd lost when her village burned could be restored and more. But as she stared at Veldrick's extended hand, Lirelei found herself thinking not of what she could gain, but of what she would lose. The Sarian's dry humor and unexpected kindness. The children who'd already begun teaching her their probability games. The dozens of refugees who'd found safety in the sanctuary's impossible halls. Kale, not the guardian with his magical needs. And centuries of loneliness, but the man who'd caught her when she fell, who'd trembled when he almost touched her face, who'd looked at her as if she were something precious and rare. No, she said firmly. Veldrick's pleasant expression flickered into something monstrous. What did you say? I said no. Whatever you are, whatever you want those dimensional rifts for, I won't be part of it. She straightened, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. And I won't abandon people who need help just because someone offers me an easier path. Foolish girl. You have no idea what forces you're defying. Maybe not. But I know the difference between someone who saves lives and someone who destroys them. She met his inhuman gaze without flinching. Get out of my room. Valdric's form began to shift and expand, revealing something with too many angles and eyes like burning coals. If you won't come willingly, I'll simply take you by force and let the sanctuary. His words cut off as silver light exploded through the room. Cale burst through the door with magic crackling around him like controlled lightning, his eyes blazing with protective fury. Get away from her. The battle between Cale and Valdric shook the sanctuary to its foundations. Reality warped around them as they unleashed powers that predated human civilization. Silver light clashing against consuming darkness. Order wrestling with chaos in a dance that threatened to tear holes in the dimensional barriers themselves. Lirelei pressed herself against the far wall as furniture exploded into splinters and her mirror shattered into fragments that reflected impossible angles of space. Through the chaos, she could see that Cale was losing. 3 centuries of maintaining the sanctuary had drained his reserves, while Valdric drew power from the dimensional rifts themselves. The convergence is reaching its peak, the Sarian's voice echoed through the magical maelstrom as she appeared in the doorway. If the binding isn't completed within minutes, the sanctuary will collapse regardless of who wins this fight. Then we do it now, Lirelei shouted over the sound of reality. Tearing. The temporary binding, I choose that option. Cale's silver light faltered as her words hit him. Lirelei, you don't understand, I understand perfectly. She pushed herself off the wall and began moving toward the heart chamber, dodging bursts of chaotic energy. I understand that hundreds of people will die if this place falls, and I understand that you've been too scared to trust me with the truth. But I also understand that love isn't about perfect choices or ideal circumstances. Valdric's attention snapped to her. You cannot be serious. You're choosing captivity over freedom? I'm choosing responsibility over selfishness. She reached the chamber's threshold. And I'm choosing to trust someone who saved my life instead of someone who threatens innocent people. The heart chamber pulsed with convergence energy, the crystal walls showing not reflections but glimpses of every possible future spreading out like branches on an infinite tree. At the center, the energy orb blazed with power that made her eyes water. Cale appeared beside her, breathing hard from his battle with Valdric. Are you certain? Once we begin the ritual, there's no going back. You'll be connected to this place. Forever, even if you choose to leave. I know. She took his hands, feeling the tremor in his fingers that spoke of exhaustion and hope warring together. But I also know that some connections are worth having, even when they're complicated. And after, when the ritual is complete and you're free to go? She smiled, understanding finally flooding through her like warm light. Maybe the real question isn't whether I'll stay or leave, but whether you're brave enough to trust that I might choose you freely instead of just accepting magical necessity. Something shifted in his storm-gray eyes, a wall coming down, a door opening onto possibilities he'd been too afraid to consider. I love you, he said simply. Not because of magic or convenience or loneliness. Because you sing to keep your courage up and help children find lost kittens and choose to save others even when it costs you everything. I love you too, she replied, meaning it completely. Because you've spent 3 centuries helping refugees even though it trapped you here. And because you were willing to risk everything to save a stranger. And because you're brave enough to admit when you're wrong. They stepped toward the energy orb together as Valdric's roars of fury echoed behind them. The moment their joined hands touched the pulsing light, power exploded through them both, not the cold binding of magical contract, but something warm and alive and freely chosen. Lirelei felt her consciousness expand to encompass the entire sanctuary, felt the gratitude of every refugee who'd found safety within its walls, felt the strength that came from genuine partnership. But underneath it all, she felt Cale, his memories, his fears, his desperate hope that love might be real. And he felt her in return, her determination to rebuild what had been lost, her fierce protectiveness toward those who couldn't protect themselves, her courage in the face of impossible choices, the binding completed in a surge of shared purpose that sent Valdric shrieking back into whatever dimension had spawned him. The sanctuary's walls solidified, its magic renewed for centuries to come, its refugees safe once more. When the light faded, Lirelei found herself still in Cale's arms, but something fundamental had changed. The telepathic link was there, just as he'd warned, a constant awareness of the sanctuary's needs and the pain of those who might seek its shelter. But it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like shared purpose. "So," she said, smiling up at him, "what happens now?" "Now we have 300 years to figure out whether this is just magical compatibility or something real." "I think I already know," she said, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like freedom chosen rather than freedom given. "But I suppose we should make sure." Around them, the sanctuary hummed with contentment, its walls reflecting not just light but the warmth of a love freely offered and gratefully received. And in the distance, the Saurians' laughter rang like silver bells, celebrating not just the renewal of ancient magic, but the birth of something even more powerful, a partnership based on choice, trust, and the courage to love without guarantees. Refugees were safe. The sanctuary was whole. And two hearts that had been broken by loss and loneliness had found in each other not just healing, but home.